Hi, I'm Rosenberg. Welcome to my latest YouTube video. Today I'm going to talk about continuums, specifically the anger continuum. If you follow me, or especially if you read my book, you know how fond I am of continuums. In fact, one of my primary concepts in the Human Magnet Syndrome book is my relationship compatibility continuum that shows that there are gradations of a person who is more giving than taking, and there are gradations for the person who is more taking than giving. In the extreme case, if you give all of the love, respect, and caring away, you hope it's reciprocated, and it's not, which means you're in a relationship with a narcissist, and you stay in the relationship. That is an example of codependency, or what I call self-love deficit disorder. That is at the very extreme end of my relationship compatibility continuum. At the very end of the other side is someone who needs all the love, respect, and care, forces or manipulates another person to give it all without the intention of sharing or reciprocating. Well, that is a pathological narcissist, whether it's someone with narcissistic, borderline, or antisocial personality disorder. If I reflect back on my Human Magnet Syndrome book, there are probably 5 primary concepts that I created that I believe are contributions to the mental health field, because it demonstrates that if you're a codependent, that means you are on the extreme end of a continuum. And if you are a pathological narcissist, that means you are on the other side of a continuum. And there are gradations for people that give too much, and there are gradations for people who take too much, which represents that not everyone is a codependent or has self-love deficit disorder, but can have a problem. And not everyone has a personality disorder or is a pathological narcissist while behaving selfishly. So in that example, a continuum is a marvelous tool to demonstrate a problem and its variability, the different shades of a problem. Because if we make everything black or white, all or nothing, it might be more convincing in an argument. It might be easier to understand, but we accidentally lose the people who do not quite fit the definition of the extremes. So if you are an SLD or a codependent and you participate in the treatment program I created, the Self-Love Recovery Treatment Program, you're going to start off as a -5, but you're going to make progress, and you're going to go from -4, -3, and 0, theoretically, is the balance between how much love, respect, and care you give versus receive. And anyone who's in this 0 point is balance. So if you are this SLD and you get better and you go from a -5 to a 4, it doesn't mean you're an SLD anymore. It doesn't mean you're a codependent once you get to, say, towards the middle of the continuum. It means you might have some problems, or you might choose to give more than you take, but you don't get the diagnosis. You don't get lumped in with people that have a more serious mental health issue. Conversely, if you are selfish, vain, kind of full of yourself, but you have empathy and you have awareness, you still can be a pain in the rear end, but you're not going to be represented in the far end of the continuum. So that is a living, breathing example of why I like continuums as I've already applied them. Another continuum that I created that I believe is essential to my self-love recovery treatment program is my healing the inner trauma child objective. In other words, addressing the trauma responsible for self-love deficit disorder, which requires a specialized technique because you are dealing with unconscious, disassociated emotions. I am a trainer and an educator, and I have given many seminars, many presentations that have lasted anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, and I record each one of them. And I make those recordings, whether they're video or audio recordings, available to the public and they come with detailed handouts. But in a training that I have out there called HITCH, Healing the Inner Trauma Child Treatment Method, I explain exactly what trauma is in relationship to the cause of SLDD or codependency, and that is attachment trauma. And in that video, I present another one of my continuums. Again, I love continuums, and that is called the trauma continuum. And in the mental health fields, for good reason, you either are something and diagnosed or you're not. And I'm a big fan of that, and that would be another video to explain why that's important. But with trauma, if all you treat is post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD or CPTSD, then the people that have been traumatized in a manner and an extent that has not left the scar of PTSD, then they are lost in the system. So I created a trauma continuum, starting from being upset and mildly traumatized, which is not pathological, it's not comfortable, to the most severe ongoing chronic trauma. And by understanding trauma as a condition that can be represented on a continuum, now we can address it even if it doesn't rise to the level of PTSD. So in that vein, I am drawn to continuums. The anger continuum, I believe, is just as important to understand because it is so relevant in the type of therapeutic work I do along the lines of self-love deficit disorder or codependency or even trauma resolution. Anger can be manifested through overt direct expression. You get me so angry. That is the overt expression of anger. And then you can have something that is equally powerful, and that is the internalized experience of anger. And you might have a blank face. If you're a good actor, you might even have a smile, and you're feeling the same feelings, but you're not saying anything. Anger is not a condition like a broken bone. It's either broken or it's not. There are gradations of it. There are different ways to express it. There's internal, external. There's all sorts of ways to describe anger. And if you don't have the words or the ability to explain how you feel and the objective intensity and frequency and damage that it creates for you and other people, then you cannot solve it. If you think anger is equivalent to violence, then anything under violence is no big deal. If you equate anger to yelling, then if you never yell, then you're not angry. If you equate anger to passive aggression, where you're angry, but for a bunch of different reasons, you don't want to, or you purposely don't express it openly and honestly, but express it passively and act as if you're not expressing it and are surprised at a person's reaction, well, that's passive aggression. There are so many forms of anger. There is rage, where the anger is so consuming, it impacts your judgment, and you want to hurt a person. Whether you are doing it on purpose or not, you are causing someone harm and potentially yourself harm. So there is moderate anger where, you're at work and your boss upsets you and you want to tell him to take a hike, but you don't because you want to keep your job, because you know that your boss does not handle normal anger where you just don't agree with him and he or she's being unfair. There is annoyance where someone keeps doing something that you don't like. It doesn't necessarily really anger you, but it irritates you. It annoys you. You don't like it. You try to avoid it if you can. And if you can't, you just try to deal with it. And that's a form of anger. Then there's frustration. And that is another form of anger. So with all of these types of anger, if someone says to you, Bob, I'm angry at you. Well, what the heck does that mean? You're angry at me. Does that mean I've done something so bad that our friendship is over? Does that mean you're going to get aggressive? Does that mean you're going to pull away from me? Or are you just a little bit annoyed and you're overreacting, or you're just over-exaggerating? So if someone says they're annoyed, how often has someone said to you, this is annoying? and you look at them and all the signs point to they're really angry. And then what about in the cases of SLDs or codependents, when they just look frustrated and you ask them, are you okay? Is anything bothering you? And they say, oh, no, I'm fine. But if they weren't an SLD, the appropriate response would be anger. By the way, in this whole discussion, it is assumed that anger is a natural human feeling. And I know I'm digressing, but it's important to understand that everyone has a different definition for anger. Everyone has a different definition for the threshold of the feeling to be considered anger. And if you are an SLD and you are angry, you might not even know you're angry because of the complicated psychological dynamics that are responsible for the disorder. And I explain that in my human magnet syndrome work and my seminar and educational videos. And it is so common when I work with SLDs that they don't even know they're angry. They smile when they're angry. They smile when they cry. They say they're annoyed when they're really experiencing internal rage. And then you have the flip side, the people that are reactive to a stimulus that makes them angry. And if you have a personality disorder and you are a pathological narcissist, say you have narcissistic personality disorder, and someone says, wow, that is a really lovely dress you're wearing. I'm not so sure the scarf matches. I would go with more of a pink. By the way, I'm colorblind, so I'm just making this up. But I'd go with a pink. But darling, you look magnificent. Well, if you're a pathological narcissist, you're going to hear what is wrong and you're going to get angry. And depending on a lot of factors, that anger can be anything from annoyance to rage. It's just the nature of pathological narcissists. Anger has many faces. And not only does it have many names, it has a wide variety of subjective interpretations. So if you are a codependent or what I call self-love deficient, or you just struggle with anger and you want to solve it, you want to get past it, you want to overcome its negative, dysfunctional impact it has on your life. I know all about this because this has been my own personal work. I was one of these SLDs, codependents, that was very angry. And every so often it comes back. And I've been in enough therapy to know what to do and how to manage it. So if we are going to take responsibility for being angry when either we have denied it or we are oblivious to it and we are taught that to be angry you're bad, so you don't even want to think about it, or you can't recognize it or you're unable to recognize it for a complicated variety of reasons, if you're going to want to overcome your anger or a problem that is supported by your anger, and self-love deficit disorder is absolutely supported by your anger when considering how it perpetuates, the problem perpetuates in a relationship with a pathological narcissist. And that, my friends, is discussed in my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome. The anger that an SLD has for the narcissist keeps them connected, hooked into, and in many cases entrapped in the relationship with the narcissist. That anger I explain as false power syndrome, which is a concept, again, like many of my concepts I bring out today, deserve its own conversation. But it'll suffice to say that false power syndrome is a form of anger that makes you feel like you want to fight. And if you're a pathological narcissist and you know that you stay in control, then you want to get someone angry enough so they'll fight. So because of all of this and more, it's important to understand anger on a continuum. Because if we can quantify and qualify anger accurately, then we get past the most challenging hurdle of mental health treatment, psychotherapy, counseling, not coaching. Coaching is helpful, but this falls under the domain of a higher level mental health process. If you want to overcome your anger problems and your anger control therapy, if you want to overcome your tendency to get annoyed and angry because you're missing out in the quality of life, you're missing out on being happy, If you want to understand as an SLD how anger keeps you intertwined in a relationship that's unhealthy, say the one with pathological narcissists. If you want to understand how anger can be provoked in you so that you want to fight, false power syndrome, you want to fight, and everyone knows my observe, don't absorb method and the saying it was based upon by George Bernard Shaw. If you want to wrestle with pigs, you'll get dirty. Besides, the pig likes it. In that situation, when a narcissist can get you angry, then you'll fight, and then they have control over you. It's essential to understand anger on a continuum. It's essential to understand, just like my relationship compatibility continuum, all of the continuums that I didn't mention that are valid. It gives you very clear data of where you are objectively. And sometimes you'll need psychotherapy or another person who is capable of identifying something that sometimes is not easy to see or understand. Understanding exactly the level of anger you feel, again, objectively, will help you overcome it. Because if you are enraged and objectively experience aggravated, agitated, and combative rage, and let's assume you're not a pathological narcissist, and you come from a really dysfunctional family where there's a lot of abuse, and you just call that normal anger. Well, if that is normal anger, what is the threshold for dysfunctional anger? So your understanding of anger does not fit on a objectively constructed continuum. So now I'm going to present the anger continuum. Everything about the anger continuum you should know has already been discussed in the importance of continuums. So it starts with the absence of anger. No anger. For scientific and theoretical purposes, I'm going to say it is a neutral feeling. You're not happy, you're not sad, you're not angry. Nothing is really evoking an emotion. You're just going about your day and you're equal. Now, there are psychological explanations for what that is, and some of them can be positive, but we're just talking about feelings. So at the beginning of the anger continuum is the absence of anger and other negative and positive emotions. And on the far end of the continuum is homicidal or suicidal rage. And the reason I pick that is I cannot imagine a more dangerous, out of control form of anger. So the continuum starts with no anger, and the first form of identifiable anger is frustration. And there's gradations of frustration. You always have to reach a threshold in order to label it. So there is a threshold at which you go, objectively, I'm frustrated. I have tried to get online to buy something from Amazon, and your computer is slow. And you know it's slow and it doesn't surprise you, but it frustrates you. You're not angry. You're not even frustrated enough to do something about it. Or let's say you can't. And then there are gradations of frustration. And then we move to annoyance, the first physical symptoms of anger. Your blood pressure might rise and you might feel it. For me, I feel the tension. I can feel it in my head. Some people describe it, they can feel it in their belly or in their throats. It's, you're in line, you're at a grocery store, and you're in a hurry. And the cashier is chatting with the customer, and you're not in a sympathetic or empathetic mode. And let's just call that normal because let's say in this situation, you normally can be. And you are late. Someone's waiting for you. Now you are annoyed. You're not annoyed enough where you get to the next level, but you want to say something. You consider saying something. You might give a look, cross your arms and have a look. Or it might actually politely say something that can be misinterpreted as being rude. Not everyone does the right thing or is proud of what they do once they start to get angry. And some people stand by it. Well, that's annoyance. And then there are gradations of annoyance. At the far end of annoyance, there's a threshold for anger. And anger is this negative affective state. Affect is a term used to describe the physical and observable manifestations of an emotion. If you are angry, got that look on your face, well, that's angry affect. If you're sitting there tapping your foot, looking impatient, well, that's affect. So anger is when the affect openly gets triggered and you can't control it as much as you think. You cannot stop, modify, or even hide your affect. The best you can do is look neutral. And people who are good at that, some who are more disassociated than others, which is not a good thing, do that well. So as we move through the anger continuum is the absence of anger to frustration, annoyance, anger that starts to cause uncomfortable internal feelings that create the compulsion of defending yourself. Anger that creates the compulsion of fighting back, or as they say, fighting fire with fire. Then there is a point somewhere in this continuum, and it's different depending on who you are, what your personality type is, or what your mental health condition is. There's a point that empathy disappears. For some, that's at annoyance. For others, that's at extreme anger. But once your empathy disappears, you feel righteous. You have this need to fight back. I call that false power syndrome. Then when you fight back, you feel righteous about it, and your empathy goes away because you think, well, he's hurting me or she's hurting me. It's only fair that I hurt them back. Or in extreme cases, depending on your psychopathology, let's say you have a narcissistic or antisocial personality disorder, or even borderline personality disorder, then you feel justified in hurting a person. And for some people who have these severe problems, they believe that the more pain that they give the person, the more punishment they give to the person for getting them angry, the more that person will not do that again. So then, moving on with the continuum, is we move to that threshold of rage. At that point of rage, that point of the continuum, you become irrational. Your thought processes, your ability to analyze things correctly, your judgment, all become impaired. All you think about is hurting the person that's hurting you. And depending on your personality type and your mental health condition, that might involve extreme physical beating. It could involve stealing their money. It could involve something more passive aggressive, or even something more covert aggressive, where you feel justified to steal their money or justified to do something to them to sabotage their career goals or educational goals. And as you move forward on that continuum is homicidal rage or suicidal rage. And so let me use an analogy for this continuum. You're boiling water. There's a point at which the water turns warm. And I'm going to call that frustration. And I'm using United States metrics of Fahrenheit. Annoyance might be 90 degrees. Well, that's kind of warm. Anger is 140, where it's hot. You can still keep your finger in the water. I know this because I make espresso, and I am so OCD about it. I try to keep the coffee at 155 degrees. And I understand that that's too hot to keep your finger in. Rage is where if you put your finger in, you're going to get scalded. You're going to get a second or third degree burn because it's 170 degrees to boiling 220. So using this analogy, you can understand that anger is this negative state that is not all that uncomfortable in its most mild form, and its most extreme form is very uncomfortable and hurtful, damaging, or in psychological terminology, creates personal, relational, or functional impairment. It's dysfunctional. It's pathological, whatever term you use. Anger is pathological because it will always cause a person harm if it's not expressed. Because if your blood pressure goes up, your cortisol levels go up, all of your hormones and chemicals start changing, you go into flight or fight mode, and if you stay angry too often, then it has debilitating impact on your mental and physical health. Although it is a necessary emotion, it's a human emotion that we need in order to function in our world. When anger is chronic, it's caused by another person in order to hurt you or to limit you or to entrap you, or it escalates where you lose control, then this is a pathological condition. So back to the continuum. There's anger. The temperature goes up. As the temperature goes up, your affect goes up. And if you can hide your affect, your internal experience goes up. There is a point at which, on this anger continuum, there is an impulse to do something that you normally wouldn't do that actually is focused upon stopping the anger, which often is doing something that will provoke anger in the person that is causing it. If someone is talking too much, if someone is belittling you, if someone is pushing you around and you get angry enough, you defend yourself, and that would be called normal and healthy anger, depending on how you defend yourself. And it is not healthy as if you pick up a bat, a piece of wood, and hit someone. Well, that's dangerous, that's illegal, and potentially fatal. When you get to moderate points of anger on the continuum, you have compulsions to hurt someone. Depending on a slew of psychological variables, that can be homicide to just a verbal confrontation. When you are angry, your common sense, your ability to discern social cues, and your best part of your personality that wants to make friends, resolve problems, tends to disappear. And I'm going to say that's human because of the nature of anger. But if you don't know how to control your anger, or you are chronically in situations that escalate your anger to where you can't control it, well, that's not normal or healthy. So, in conclusion, I presented today my anger continuum. It can be an important utility or tool for a person who's trying to understand their self-love deficit disorder or codependency, which is my specialty, because SLDs never learned to express anger when they feel it, to identify with anger, or to recognize it, because a category of SLDs, and I call that passive SLDs or oblivious SLDs, they have never learned to recognize and to understand and therefore stop their anger because it's pushed down, it's buried, but it's there. Or you can be an active SLD and you can be angry all the time. Or you can have anger problems and not relate to the whole codependency narcissist idea that's in my Human Magnet Syndrome book. But when you understand anger is starting from its very mildest point on this continuum and having the potential to move to the most severe point, you can understand it according to its gradations. You can understand it according to its thresholds. You can understand it according to a term and the consequences that are connected to the term, so that you can stop, overcome, neutralize, or find a way to resolve your anger problem. And in addition, you can realize that your other feeling that manifests from this dysfunctional relationship that you are able to focus on are caused by underlying feelings of anger. Another way of looking at this is to understand that in the cases of someone who is chronically angry, you can find out that that is a secondary emotion that is easier to understand and express than sadness. Again, another topic for another video. So I hope this discussion on anger, continuums, and levels of dysfunction, or what I would call functional impairment, is helpful. The more you understand about your emotional health or emotional ill health, the more you can either keep it going or resolve it. And if you don't understand your anger and you over-exaggerate it when it shouldn't be, or under-exaggerate it, I believe my continuum will be of help. Should you want more information on a variety of my other subjects, including my Human Magnet Syndrome book, please, I encourage you to go to my company, Self-Love Recovery Institute's website, selfloverecovery.com, and everything you need to know about me, what I do, and some of my educational resources will be there. And subscribe if you are a YouTube viewer, or just keep downloading my podcast, because I want to get you to the point of finding self-love abundance, which is the cure for self-love deficit disorder. Okay, guys, take care and be well.